Hello and welcome to Varrostories. In this video I will tell you about the cozy horror story The Attic. When Emily and Thomas bought the cottage, they'd been dreaming of a life away from the city for years. It was a perfect little house tucked away on the edge of a small village, surrounded by fields and forests. The air was fresh, the pace of life slower. Their new home had everything they'd ever wanted: wooden floors that creaked with character, a fireplace that crackled with the warmth of home, and a quaint attic full of old, forgotten things. It was an idyll, a dream come true. The first night, they sat in front of the fire, sipping hot cocoa and basking in the glow of their decision. Outside, the wind howled, shaking the trees in a way that made the house seem alive, creaking and groaning as it settled in for the night. They laughed it off, joking about how the house had its own personality. It was nothing to worry about, they said. Just the house settling, as houses did. The sound wasn't exactly unsettling at first. It was a soft creak, followed by a slight scratch, like something dragging along the floorboards above their heads. Emily had laughed it off, curling up a little closer to Thomas on the couch. Just the house settling, she said, but even as she spoke, she wasn't entirely convinced. Days passed, and the sound continued every night. A quiet creak, a gentle scrape. Always from the attic. It was almost rhythmic, like something was moving around up there, shifting on its own. But when they checked, the attic was always empty. They'd gone up there twice already, finding nothing but dusty old furniture covered with sheets and boxes full of forgotten trinkets. The wind sometimes rattled the windows, and they supposed that could account for the odd sounds. But still, it didn't feel entirely normal. Maybe we should just go up there and see if there's something loose or squeaking, Thomas suggested one evening. He wasn't scared, just curious. Emily agreed, though she wasn't sure what they were looking for. It wasn't as if they'd find a ghost up there, or would they? The attic had an almost oppressive atmosphere. The slanted roof, the low beams, the cold smell of musty wood and old fabric filled the air. Emily was the first to reach the top of the stairs. Her foot creaked on the top step, and she paused, listening. For a moment, there was nothing but the usual silence, but then, faintly, she heard the scraping again. "See? It's definitely something up here," she said. Thomas nodded, his flashlight sweeping over the dark corners. Dust floated lazily in the beams of light, and they moved slowly, cautiously, between the piles of forgotten things. It was just as they had left it, old furniture covered with dusty white sheets, wooden crates stacked in corners, things that looked as though they had not been touched in decades. There was nothing strange or out of place, except for the odd scraping sound that seemed to come from the far corner. "Over there," Emily said, pointing. Thomas moved toward the corner, his boots echoing on the floorboards. As he lifted his flashlight, something caught his eye. A rocking chair, sitting all alone in the corner, creaked as if moved by a gust of wind. But the window was shut. The chair wasn't supposed to move on its own. "It wasn't rocking when we came up here, right?" Emily asked, her voice thick with uncertainty. "No," Thomas replied, his face pale in the dim light. He took a cautious step forward, and the chair creaked again, its rocking more pronounced now, as if it were inviting him to sit. Thomas paused, a shiver running up his spine. Emily stepped closer, eyes wide. She reached out a hand to stop the chair from rocking, but before she could touch it, a sudden rush of air seemed to swirl around them, causing the chair to lurch forward. "Let's get out of here," Emily said, her voice trembling. "Yeah, something's off about this," Thomas agreed, backing away. They hurried out of the attic, the strange sounds following them down the stairs. As they closed the attic door, the last echo of the creaking chair lingered in the silence of the house. For the next few days, they tried to ignore the unease that gnawed at them. They kept busy unpacking and getting settled in their new home. But every night, without fail, the creaking returned. It was louder now, more insistent. It almost seemed to mock them, as though the house itself were daring them to confront whatever haunted the attic. It was on the third night after the chair incident that Emily couldn't take it anymore. She was lying in bed, her eyes wide open in the dark, listening to the slow, deliberate creaks from above. She'd convinced herself that it was just a flow of wind that caused the chair to move, but deep down, she knew better. Something was wrong. She could feel it in her bones. "Thomas," she whispered, nudging him. "We need to go up there. Now." Thomas groggily sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Emily, not again. We've been up there twice already, and there's nothing. It's just the house." But Emily wasn't convinced. She couldn't sleep, couldn't ignore the creeping feeling that someone, was waiting for them up there. "We have to. I'm not going to be able to sleep until we check again," she insisted. Reluctantly, Thomas stood up and grabbed the flashlight. The house was eerily still as they made their way to the attic door. The sound of creaking wood filled the silence, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Thomas unlocked the door, and they climbed the stairs. This time, as they reached the top, the air felt colder than it had before. The chair sat in the corner again, rocking slowly, as if it had been waiting for them. The same strange energy seemed to hang in the air, thick and suffocating. Emily stepped forward, her breath visible in the frigid air. "We need to move the chair," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe it's causing the sound." Thomas nodded, though a tightness had settled in his chest. He bent to grip the chair's armrests, and as his fingers touched the worn wood, a deep, guttural creak echoed through the room, almost as though the chair itself was alive. The rocking stopped abruptly. For a split second, everything was still. Then, as though an invisible force had pushed it, the chair suddenly jerked backward, sending a loud, jarring screech through the attic. Both of them froze, the air thick with a presence neither of them could name. The room felt colder still, and the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long. Then, a whisper, a faint, rasping sound, reached their ears. It was a voice, barely audible, but unmistakable. "Help me." Emily's heart raced. She spun toward Thomas, her eyes wide with terror. "Did you hear that?" Thomas nodded, his face ashen. His grip tightened on the flashlight, but his hands were shaking. He wanted to leave, to turn and run, but something held him in place. The voice came again, clearer this time, "Help me. Please." The whispers seemed to fill the space around them, growing louder, more desperate. "Help me. I've waited so long." Emily's breath hitched. Her body trembled as she turned toward the rocking chair once more. The shadows in the room seemed to darken, thickening like smoke. And then, slowly, as if something unseen were guiding it, the chair began to rock once more. Slowly. Gently. "Who's there?" Thomas called out, his voice strained. The chair stopped. Then, with an almost imperceptible movement, the dust-covered sheet that had draped the chair shifted, as though something were sitting in it. A soft outline of a figure became visible under the cloth, a silhouette of a person, hunched and waiting. Emily's pulse quickened. Her feet felt rooted to the floor, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the shape in the chair. The figure shifted, a low, eerie chuckle filling the room. "Leave," it whispered, the voice like sandpaper against her nerves. "Leave before it's too late." A cold wind howled through the attic, swirling around them with force. The air grew oppressive, suffocating. Emily grabbed Thomas's arm, pulling him toward the door. "Let's go, now." But as they turned to run, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The whispering intensified, the figure in the chair now standing, its movements jerky and unnatural. Too late. Too late. Thomas and Emily pounded on the door, panic rising in their chests. The figure stepped closer, and they could feel the temperature drop even further. "Help me." The whisper was no longer a request. It was a command.